Hey, it's Tony here. Hope you're having a great day. For my midterm, I chose to do the film Fear and Desire, released in 1952 by my favorite director, Stanley Kubrick, this film actually being his first feature film. This movie starts off with a very capturing short narration that gives the viewer a sense of what they're about to experience in the film. The narrator's cryptic words give me the notion that this film was not made to show the glory of war, but to show the depressing, dark emotional effects of war. He does this by pointing out the complete fabrication of this war and the people you are about to encounter in the film. However, he also says that the emotions like fear and doubt experienced/fought by these characters and vicariously by the audience watching them are real. This tells the viewer that this film hopes to evoke real emotion from the audience by using the harsh, sad, emotional reality of people in war. The story begins with 4 soldiers of unknown origin: Lieutenant Corby, Sergeant Mack, Private Sidney, and Private Fletcher. They just recently crash landed their planes 6 miles deep behind enemy lines, and with the supposed thousands of enemies within those 6 miles, they are in some heavy shit, but quickly they elaborate a plan. Led by Lieutenant Corby, who off the bat is very calm, cool, and collected in such a pressing situation, organizes a plan to build a raft and utilize a very convenient river that flows directly out of enemy territory to escape their dire situation. The group somewhat agrees with the plan, with Sergeant Mack being reluctant to follow due to losing credibility in Lieutenant Corby, blaming him for the plane crash that happened prior. The group is then ambushed by a dog that startles them but brings no threat. Private Sidney sits down and pets the dog, showing his innocence compared to the group who either ignore the dog or make jokes about the dog being a better military resource rather than a loving pet. After shooing the dog away, the group starts walking towards the river. During this walk, the camera follows the 4 soldiers for multiple scenes, with very emotionally driven dialogue from each character playing at the same time. At first this confused me, but very quickly I understood that this was the individual subconscious of each member of the group, and it was played to show the emotional disturbance of these characters as they quietly march through enemy territory. They end up making it to the river with no real trouble other than seeing an enemy truck. The group starts to construct the raft with Sergeant Mack spotting an airfield as well as a general's home surrounded by guards down the river. The sight of the enemy's general really excites Mack, showing some deeper look into the character Mack is and will show to be. That scene is followed by the group almost being seen by an enemy plane, but somehow by fate, they aren't. Later, the soldiers stumble upon a cabin. With 2 enemy soldiers inside, they also see 2 guns on the wall that Lieutenant Corby deems useful for their escape, due to losing most of their weapons in the plane crash. The group immediately heads back to the cabin, planning to break in, kill the enemies, steal their weapons, which they successfully do so, with Private Sidney being hesitant to do so, either out of fear or the innocence he displayed earlier. Next, they begin to eat the enemy's food. When another one walks in, unknowing of the group's newly established claim on the cabin, they kill him immediately with a couple loud gunshots that forces the group to abandon the cabin. But before they all leave, Lieutenant Corby has a deep personal thought while gazing upon the corpses of his enemies, pretty much saying he feels as if mankind has become selfish, almost admitting his own selfishness. The film cuts the next day, showing the group laying on a hill, with Private Sidney being obviously scarred from the horrors of the day prior. The group starts traversing to the raft they made when they stumble upon a fisherwoman who spots them, forcing them to take her captive in fear of her giving away their position to the enemy. Private Sidney is very against the idea of holding this girl captive and pleads with the group to let her go, but to no avail, with Lieutenant Corby and Sergeant Mack agreeing she's a threat to the plan if released. So they tie her to a tree and leave Private Sidney to watch her as the 3 others figure out what's going on with their raft. Immediately after they leave, Sidney begins to have flashbacks to the people they killed, alluding to Sidney losing his mind. Consequently, Sidney begins to unknowingly torment the girl, convinced she likes him in a sexual way. He touches and gropes, saying very crazy, outlandish things that guarantee the loss of the innocent, kind person Sidney showed to be prior to these emotionally disturbing events. The rest of the group found the raft to be fine and covered it with some leaves to hide it from the enemy. Sergeant Mack looked at the enemy general again, admitting his desire to kill the man and his jealousy of him. Suddenly, Lieutenant Corby felt worried about what's going on with Sidney and the girl, so he sent Sergeant Mack to go check it out. While Mack was heading back, Sydney was still rubbing up on the poor captured woman, undoing the belt constraining her, leading to her rightfully fleeing, and in an act of pure emotionally traumatic induced delusion, he shot her dead. Mack arrives after hearing the gunshot, shocked by the woman's body. Private Sydney expresses his innocence in a very concerning, psychotic way, proving he is now mentally insane. He then flees, leaving the rest of the group to believe he's gone for good. They prepare to make their journey on the raft at nightfall. Out of nowhere, Mack suggests a suicidal plan of being a decoy to distract the general's men, while Corby and Fletcher kill the general and take off in a plane on the airfield. Lieutenant Corby counters this with the obvious answer of "You'll die, Mack." But Mack answers this with a very depressing outlook on his future, deeming he has nothing to live for, and killing a general would be a climactic ending that would give his life purpose through his own death. He then questions Lieutenant Corby on what makes his life so precious, which sends Lieutenant Corby spiraling in his own mind, not knowing the answer, resulting in him agreeing with Sergeant Mack's plan. The plan commences, sending Mack out in the raft to distract the enemies with offensive gunfire. While he traverses over by raft, he reflects on his life and doesn't like what he sees. He then accepts his destined fate to trade his life for the life of the enemy general. The next scene, it cuts to the general staring ahead coldly, talking about how a long experience in war has prepared him to die, leaving him numb to the concept of death, but paranoid that all the death and destruction he causes will manifest his own death. Mack finally arrives at the general's home and starts open firing, distracting all the enemies as they start to return fire on Mack, shooting him down. Lieutenant Corby and Private Fletcher use this time to shoot the general who barely survives, pleading for mercy, saying he surrenders to no avail as Corby shoots him dead without a thought. The two soldiers head off to the plane, escaping successfully, leaving Mack, who barely survived, floating down the riverbed in the raft. A critically wounded Mack runs into a more insane than ever Private Sydney while floating downstream and lets him aboard. Corby and Fletcher wait by the end of the river, waiting to hopefully see Mack. While they wait, they discuss the effects the experience has had on them, saying it changed their outlook on life for the worse, with Fletcher expressing the want to return the way he felt before. Suddenly, they hear singing coming from a very mentally unstable Private Sydney floating towards them, with an assumed dead Sergeant Mack on board. Private Fletcher says he wasn't meant for this. Lieutenant Corby answers with "No one was." This ends the film, leaving the audience off with a very sad but meaningful conclusion. The genre of war in film was not new to the year 1952, with war being one of the oldest genres in film. First being brought to the big screen in 1898, with the 90-second short called "Tearing Down the Spanish Flag." Inspired by the very recent declare of war on Spain from the United States, this film was made to encourage support for the war against Spain. Many war films in the years following this continued the trend of encouraging support for a war using means of propaganda or emotion. However, there were some films like this, and for example, 1930 All Quiet on the Western Front, that strayed from this trend, using the war featured in the film for many other purposes than supporting an actual war. The war genre itself evolved immensely over time, showing people using the same genre that was used to support wars use it back at them to now denounce them. A movie having a genre of war is usually very obvious in a film due to the very intense, undeniable presence war has when depicted in films. Firstly, the war genre almost always includes a battle scene that risks death for characters. These scenes are very impactful in these films they appear in, showcasing the horrors of combat. Secondly, the war genre typically includes historical context, with a lot of films under this genre being inspired or about real wars/conflicts. Thirdly, films among the war genre commonly contain leadership/command, with dynamic and power among soldiers being real and being featured in a lot of war films, adding a stressful real challenge faced by soldiers/people in real life, other than films, that impact the lives of others. In the film Fear and Desire, the theme of the depressing toll of war is apparent from the beginning, with the narrator's opening monologue and the results of all characters being affected emotionally by the experiences of war. I think it's a great representation of the genre of war. Also, the character Private Sidney represents the genre very well, losing his mind due to war during this film. He represents the cold reality some people face in war due to traumatic experiences. His case could be assumed to be PTSD or just be a manic episode, but they were definitely caused by the horrors of war. The scene where the 4 soldiers ambush the enemy in the cabin with knives depicts the war genre in a very cold, sadistic, but real way, just like the 2 other examples before this. The character Sergeant Mack is another great representation of the war genre. With his very rough and tough demeanor he gives off the entire film, and the epic scene where he is standing alone, outnumbered by the enemy as a sacrifice for his fellow soldiers, showing the true soldier he is. All of my examples for sure reflect positivity on the genre of war, with it being amazing filmmakers express their anti-war beliefs through the genre of war, and also the representation of friendship and sacrifice shown through Mack's heroic action is positive as well. In conclusion, I thought this film was very cool, with amazing cinematography displayed throughout, and the exploration of the characters' different inner struggles while experiencing the same horrors of war was really fascinating. Also, I really found it interesting to see such an early project of my favorite director, because you can see how far he has evolved as a filmmaker since then. Even though this film was far from his best of films, I really liked it and would give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. The scenes where Private Sidney is losing his mind in front of the girl was so goofy but terrifying at the same time, which I don't know if that's what Kubrick was intending, but I found it to be very odd. Additionally, I'd like to add that Sergeant Mack was my favorite character in the film, being the rude but funny tough guy in the beginning and evolving into the heroic soldier with a death wish, sacrificing himself for others. I thought his monologue while he paddled down the river was awesome, and I was actually pretty sad at the end of the film where he's revealed laying dead on the raft. Ultimately, this movie was good, but not great, and I can definitely see how the same person who made this film later made the psychological war film Full Metal Jacket. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.